Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So Terrac are continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA D10 Nano project, and you guys cannot get enough Nintendo 64 MiSTer content. 2 days ago we got a new core that brought about 24 new games playable on the core to us, and I got a huge laundry list of games you wanted to see tested on the channel to see if they work. The great thing is a lot of those requests definitely did work, so that's what you're going to be watching today. If you get too far involved, then do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But everyone asked whether or not the 2-player mode in Super Mario 64 was working on the core, and if you can't tell already, it definitely is. This is a fan mod that adds Luigi into the game and makes Super Mario 64 a 2-player experience like the developers planned on back in the day when this came out on Nintendo 64. But you can see here, it is drawing 2 independent versions of the game at one time. It's definitely going to run a little bit slower because this core isn't perfectly optimized yet, but seeing these sort of fan mods running in and of itself is amazing. We'll be showing you a little bit more later in the video. But of course, one of the biggest requests of this entire series has been the wrestling games on Nintendo 64. This is basically the best wrestling ever got on a home console, in a lot of people's opinions, and I'm not surprised that we're seeing so many requests for it. And the great thing is almost every single wrestling game is currently working on the core. You can get some matches in and they are playable, as Mankind here comes into the ring to fight against The Undertaker. This is exactly as you remember it back in the day, and trust me, I played a metric crap ton of these wrestling games back in high school on the Nintendo 64, and I absolutely love them, but it's been a long time since I played them as well, so seeing them again on the Nintendo 64 core is such a wild experience, and trust me, I have the cartridges for these games, just haven't plugged them in for a long time. I kind of got out of the wrestling genre, and I've never gotten back in. But the fluidity, the speed, the models, this just looks like Mankind beating The Undertaker in the face, like how you remember from back in the late 90s and early 2000s. It is so fun to see this running, and I love all the different dynamic camera cuts. And I will show other wrestling games throughout the series because you guys keep asking for them. So if you do want to see wrestling game more than anything else, tell me which one it is down below so I can feature it next. Or just generally give me some recommendations. I do love those guys. But just seeing this game again running on the core, it is wild to think that basically 6 weeks ago we had a couple user demos and Namco Museum running. Nothing else worked whatsoever. I don't see anything visually in the image right here that makes it seem like the game is glitching out, but I know a lot of you think these are some of the best games of all time, which means you played them more than me. So if you do see anything on screen, please indicate when you think it's wrong and what's wrong with it so I can take a closer look, because I spend hours looking at all this footage. You guys can do a little bit more pixel peeping than me. And I do love Mankind as well. Some of those matches back in the day, like when he went through the cage roof, it was just absolutely incredible. It's one of those memories that I just have from being a kid. Watching WWF pay-per-views and seeing it here is just so good. Although I swear The Undertaker got to the rope there and should have been given a pass. But then again, wrestling is not known to be the fairest sport in the world because it is 100% scripted. Now onto Majora's Mask. Since the last time we showed this, the core has improved and this is running better and there's more graphics in it. I'm not saying that this is a perfect experience, there's definitely things missing, and I don't know if you'd want to try to actually beat this game because the odds of it freezing are definitely there. Pretty much all of the games on the Nintendo 64 core right now are fun to play around with, but if they are long, you probably shouldn't expect to finish them. The 2 games that I do know that you can see from start to finish are Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. Anything else, if you beat it, just consider yourself lucky. But as you see these intro scenes of Majora's Mask running here, this looks like the game should. In certain areas, in certain levels, and in certain environments, there is nothing missing on the screen whatsoever as far as I can tell. When you get to other environments, so there's certain aspects of the RDP, or reality display processor, that are not yet showing all of the graphics. But if you just took a screenshot of Majora's Mask right here as a link as the Deku Scrub, you would think that this was running on real hardware if you weren't watching a MiSTer video. And as we get this camera pan as we go outside as well, you really wouldn't be able to point to anything right now and say, I can tell that this isn't working anything other than perfectly. But as you move around, suddenly graphics are going to go missing, there's going to be certain textures that don't appear, and that's when you realize that this still is a work in progress core. But again, considering like 6 weeks ago you only had one retail game to play, this level of improvement this quickly is nothing short of mind-boggling how much we can actually do on the core. And as you go to the mayor's residence here again as well, if you just took a screenshot and showed it to somebody and asked them what you were playing, they would 100%, I feel, say Nintendo 64. But tell me what you think down below. I'm always curious if this looks like real footage to you or if you think it does look like MiSTer. But the music in this game, when it's working correctly, does sound great as well, so go ahead and and listen for like 35-40 seconds and I'll come back and show you a bunch more games that just work near to perfect. You can definitely tell the audio is not perfect, but it is also instantaneously recognizable as what it should be. And as we walk into the Great Fairy area here as well, seeing all these different effects, seeing the fountain, seeing all the fairies fly around, it does give me the same vibes when I first played this game back in the day. Now, I definitely prefer Ocarina of Time over Majora's Mask. I think they're both excellent games, but for me, Ocarina just slightly edges out this game. But tell me down below what you think. Either way, we're getting so close to having a fully playable experience of Majora's Mask on this core. Now, a ton of you asked for StarCraft 64, and I was really surprised. I would have assumed that a lot of people who played StarCraft didn't play it on this console because honestly, the Nintendo 64 controller isn't the best laid out to have an experience like this. But it seems like there's a ton of you out there that played StarCraft 64 back in the day, absolutely fell in love with it and wanted to see whether or not it was running, and for the longest time on the cores, this was not a game that worked. It's only recently that it come alive, but as you can see here, it is just functioning. All of the heads-up display is there, the graphics look good. This is the StarCraft you know and remember, just running on the Nintendo 64, and right now running on MiSTer FPGA. But tell me down below, where did this StarCraft 64 love come from? I did play StarCraft back in the day, but definitely not on a Nintendo console. This to me is one of the weirder games for the system. You'll see here if you do go into the menu and take a look around at the scenarios, you are going to have some graphical corruption, which luckily you can navigate past. Once you get back into the game, everything does look good again, but I'm just so surprised so many of you people fondly remember StarCraft 64. It's a great game, it just wasn't a game that I ever grew up playing on this system. But it's fun to see all these 2D assets as well. The Nintendo 64 is so much known for being a 3D console that had 3D visuals, so when you get these pure 2D visuals and games on the system, it is fun to see what the Nintendo 64 did with them. Obviously, the Sega Saturn was the preeminent 2D console of its time that had less capable 3D than the PlayStation 1 or Nintendo 64, but don't forget Nintendo did have these 2D games, and StarCraft 64 was one of them. So many of you asked about it, and it does work. Now, another game that a lot of people asked about, and I was happy to see that, is Xenocrisis. Now, this game is basically available on every retro platform known to man, but seeing it come in the Nintendo 64 was an absolute blast. It's not the type of console that you see a lot of homebrew for compared to something like the Neo Geo or Neo Geo CD, where I own this game twice over, and I've done a review on it if you want to check my channel out. Now, I will say the audio in this game, you do not want to listen to it. If you want to try Xenocrisis out, just definitely mute your television or turn the MiSTer volume down to 0, because the gunshot sound effect basically just distorts and repeats so many times, it is going to hurt your ears. Not literally, but in a way that's going to be unpleasant. But as far as the gameplay is concerned, you can see here, this is just Xenocrisis. If you've never heard of this game before, definitely check it out after this video is over. If you like a game like this, you're absolutely going to love Xenocrisis. It's the Smash TV of the future with aliens involving some shooting action. It's great, and it 100% works on the core, and it's fun to see as well because it is a modern game. Now, of course, anything that runs on real hardware has been developed with the same feature set in mind that would run on MiSTer, but it is just fun to see something modern executing on the core. People think that the modern games do something different than the retro games. They do the exact same thing, just at a different period in time until they freeze. But going back to Super Mario 64 and running around in 2-player here, Andy D got this capture for me, and he's playing both characters at once. So if you wonder why sometimes the screen stops, it is 2 hands, 1 person. But seeing this happen in real time, even on real Nintendo 64 hardware, is absolutely awesome. And it's too bad that Nintendo did have to get Super Mario 64 to market for the launch of the console, because obviously what was planned versus what we got was worlds apart. And that's not saying that the original Super Mario 64 is not one of the best games of all time. It 100% is. You just kind of wish you could have seen Nintendo's full vision come to life when they released this game. There's so much cut content, there's so many features that never made it into the game. Seeing fans recreate this is nothing short of amazing, and it's so much fun to see what the fan community out there does. They just basically take games and improve upon them. There's also a recompilation project for Super Mario 64 that I will show in a future video because it does up the frame rate and improves the performance compared to stock Nintendo 64 hardware, even though it runs on stock Nintendo 64 hardware and the MiSTer core. And that's the fun thing about playing around with MiSTer FPGA, especially if you don't have a flash cart for your Nintendo 64. There's a lot of fan love and fan modification going into this system. There's a lot of new experiences and a lot of hacks, modifications, and brand new levels for Super Mario 64 that fans have created. Some of them, in my opinion, as good as what Nintendo did back in the day. So being able to play them here on MiSTer and being able to play more in the future as the core evolves is going to be fun because you're going to get brand new experiences alongside the games you remember and love from back in the day. But if you want to play two-player Super Mario 64 on MiSTer, you can 100% do it today. Just make sure you bring a friend because 2 hands, 1 person is not an easy way to play. Now another game that everyone asked about, and it does work now, is going to be 40 Winks. It's actually worked on the previous core. I just didn't get around to showing you guys the footage yet, but this is on the newest core. This is a game that technically didn't come out on the Nintendo 64, but also technically did come out on the Nintendo 64, except many years later. This was previewed in magazines back in the 90s as another platformer coming to the system. It just never actually released, but they had an Indiegogo campaign to release this game to a modern audience. Now I'm not saying this is the best 3D platformer of all time, and it's definitely not a gigantic hidden gem, but it is a ton of fun. I have played through the game on Nintendo 64 some years ago, and I had an absolute blast doing it. And here on MiSTer, it is working, everything looks good. It does just seem like 40 Winks. I love all the visuals. It kind of feels like a lost Rare game, but it had nothing to do with Rare as far as the development process was concerned. But I will say the music in this one is near to perfect as well. So after I take you through a little bit more of the game, I'm going to give you just a sample and listen to it. But I swear this level right here is inspired 100% by the Haunted Boo Mansion in Super Mario 64. But tell me what you think down below. And here comes that music. Listen to it, hear the quality. I'll be back and show you more games that just work right now. Sounds really good. It's slightly muffled, but don't forget the Nintendo 64 had to deal with a lot of compression to make sure all these games fit on the cartridges, because the biggest game that was ever released was 64 megabytes. Compared to something like a PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn disc, there was so much more space for Redbook audio. You could just get really clear sounding soundtracks. Something like 40 Winks or any other game on the system had to deal with a lower sample rate for the most part to make sure that the audio that was able to be played by the Nintendo 64 fit on the cart. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Now another game that everyone asked to see more of is Donkey Kong 64. I really wish I could let you listen to the rap, but I tried, and it does throw up a copyright flag for certain portions of it, probably because it was featured in the most recent Super Mario movie that was done in theaters in 3D. So it's a bummer. I really wanted to let you guys hear it, but you just have to imagine it. But this game is vastly improved since we've talked about it recently, and you guys just wanted to see more footage of different areas. Now I really think Donkey Kong 64 gets a bad representation as far as reviews are concerned. Sure, it's definitely a collectathon, and there's a lot of issues with having to swap different Kong characters, but don't forget there are patches that allow you to swap whatever character you want on the fly without having to go to the special areas to do so. But everyone wanted to see the intro. A lot of people asked if that was working, and it 100% is. Now currently the audio does stop working, and there was just a recent core that fixed a little bit of audio delay, but it hasn't really gotten to get Donkey Kong 64 having the full soundtrack. Basically what happens is sometimes games, if the sound gets out of sync with the flags where it's supposed to be, it will just stop playing the music. Other games, if the sound gets out of sync, it's just what happens, it's out of sync and it continues to play. It is down to how each individual development house decided to do it. So if you play this game and you run out of music or sound effects, just know that the sync was lost and the game decided to mute from there. But as we jump in this barrel here and swim around, it does just look so well. All of these text boxes here, the transparencies, all the different effects look like Donkey Kong 64, and this is a game that I play like once every 3 years because I do fondly remember it. But tell me down below, did you have this game back in the day? Did you play it? Did you love it? Or did you not really pay much attention to it? Because I feel like by the time this came out, there were so many platformers in the Nintendo 64 and Rare had made so many, it kind of got unfairly judged as being just a collectathon when games like Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie did the exact same thing and were lauded for it. But if you've never played Donkey Kong 64 before, you can definitely check it out on the MiSTer FPGA core today. Just be aware it still will freeze, and it's not the type of game that you're just going to want to sit down and 100% play to completion because it's going to present some issues. But what works here is 100% spectacular. This is a late stage game on the Nintendo 64 that uses the RAM expansion, and it is here on MiSTer FPGA. Now, Shiren the Wanderer here is another role-playing game for a system that was devoid of so many role-playing games. The Super Nintendo and Super Famicom had hundreds, I'm sure that's an exaggeration, of role-playing games, but the Nintendo 64 didn't have many at all. And if you ever wondered, I was a child at one point in time. And this game is quirky, it's strange, it's got a lot of personality, it's a good B- tier role-playing game, but it's got an awesome soundtrack as well. So go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds, but come back because I got a few more games to show you that work today. Enjoy! Just a really fun soundtrack that sounds good here, and it is a fun game to check out on MiSTer. And you may see that there are black borders at the top and bottom of the screens only in certain scenes. A lot of times I scale these to fit so I'm not leaving that empty content there, but I wanted to show you if you were playing and you're playing it on an HD TV, this is something that will happen with basically every core. There's different video modes that pretty much every console could put out. PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn were no different whatsoever, and depending on how you have the pixels set and all the other video settings on your MiSTer, you do end up in situations where sometimes the screen is filled and sometimes the black bars are there. So be aware that's not really a core thing, it's just kind of how these games were made. But the cutscenes, the content, the music in Shiren the Wanderer, it is working, and definitely check it out if you want to. Now, to talk about another racing game that some people requested is Aero Gauge. It's like a racing game that also involves flying, has some Diddy Kong racing vibes, except obviously not anywhere near as good. But a lot of people did ask if this game was working, and if you can't tell from this footage, I'm certainly not making it up, it is working today. Now, I don't remember ever playing this game back in the day. I do have it in my collection, but I feel like maybe it came with like a bulk purchase of 20 cards, and I don't even know if I've actually ever put it into my Nintendo 64. I know at some point in time in the last 10 years or so, I have played this and checked it out, but it's one of those games that I am so not familiar with. If you see anything on screen that doesn't look correct, let me know down below, because I do not have much of a memory of ever playing this game, so it's not one of those things that I can really talk about as far as accuracy is concerned. Show me San Francisco Rush 2 or Rush 2049 and I'm going to instantaneously be able to tell whether or not it looks good and is playing well. But something like Aero Gauge here, it really is 100% a mystery to me, so I'm depending on you guys. Now, the last game I'm going to show you in this list is Hexen. We looked at it only a few videos ago, but at that point in time you had to turn off Z-Read mode or else there was no visuals on the screen whatsoever. Robert, or FPGAZumSpass, has updated the core to fix that issue, so now Hexen's going to look exactly like it should if you were playing on real hardware. This is what it used to look like. You'll see that some graphics are just coming straight through the character sprites, but that has now been fixed. So if you want to play Hexen, it does seem to be stable. Just be aware that this is an old school 90s first person shooter. It is not going to hold your hand, and the amount of maze-like architecture in this game is second to none. You're either going to 100% love it or you're going to 100% hate it. It really seems like there is no in between when it comes to Hexen. I loved it back in the 90s, even though I think Heretic is better. And I'm definitely going to give it another playthrough on the Nintendo 64 core once it is finished and I know it won't freeze, because this is a very long game as well with all of that maze structure. But it's a great example of the visual and improvements otherwise that have come to the core. Just be aware that you don't want to run into this door here. It is a little bit of a trick trap puzzle, and it's 100% going to crush your bones if you don't do it right. That's basically Hexen to a T. Everything's out to kill you, you got to figure it out, and you're going to die an absolute metric crap ton of times before you see the ending. Well, that's the current testing list for the current Nintendo 64 core as of today. I'm doing this voiceover a mere 3 hours before publishing this video, so unless Robert comes behind me and publishes a new core in the next 2 hours, and this is the most up-to-date information you can get. But don't worry, I'm going to be doing more Nintendo 64 videos. I've got a fun idea for a very special one, but if you have more requests, leave them down below. If the games are working, I will cover them. Short of that, I'll have another video tomorrow. I'll have MiSTer videos throughout the week, as well as my regular videos, but Nintendo 64 is shaping up great. Bye-bye.